And that's what climate change is about. It is literally, not figuratively, a clear and present danger.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
It is indeed Friday, and welcome to number 67 of Climate Change Roundtable. And because it's Friday, interesting thing, Greta has lost her ability to protest, at least on one place. Yes, climate activist Greta Thunberg won't be school striking after graduation, but vows to still protest. Too bad. Anyway, we've got our usual suspects with us today, Linnea Lueken and Sterling Burnett. Thank you for joining us. It's Friday, and we've got a chock-full, feature-packed, super rich show for everybody. Hi, guys.
Hello.
So, no comments, huh?
Yeah, nothing too much. I just can't think
Alrighty.
this girl isn't in the news anymore.
I think it's worth pointing out that she was a 20-year-old high school graduate. I don't know how many people stick around for 20 years, don't graduate until they're 20, but she's, she gets invited to the halls of Congress to testify. It only took her 3 extra years to graduate.
Oh, well. So anyway, at least that we won't hear about that story anymore. I'm sure she'll try to make herself relevant in other protests. But I think she's fast becoming the munchkin that was. Anyway, so speaking of munchkins and climate and so forth, there's another thing going on in Montana. There's a climate trial, basically a bunch of kids versus the state of Montana, saying that they're trying to set precedent. It's like, well, they've tried this in 6 or 7 other states, trying to sue the state, to say that the state is harming them because they're not doing enough to save the climate. It's the state's responsibility to save the whole globe or something crazy like that. And as I recall, in these other 6 or 7 incidents, the state courts and the Supreme Court of the state just struck them down as being irrelevant. Guys, what do you think about this? Is this a lost cause, or they're going to get one that sticks?
Well,
Montana's unique. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to give a little background. This has already occurred in Utah. They had a similar, there were a couple other states, but the most recent one was in Utah, and a judge dismissed it because you can't, they found that the whole case, I'm pulling up the text real quick here. Sorry about that. Sorry for the dead air here. Well, I do not see the part where it says exactly what the judge had said, but basically they found that this group that was represented by a group called Our Children's Trust, which is a group that does nothing but try to get groups of kids to sue states over climate change stuff, did exactly the same thing. They said that the state's development of fossil fuel infrastructure violates their civil rights and poses a threat to their very lives. And they have basically said, you can't say this. You can't prove that there are any constitutionally protected, claims that are being violated here. It's just moot, basically.
From state after state, Oregon, Alaska, Utah, they've tried this. Sometimes it's been constitutional challenges because they claim they have a right to life, and that's guaranteed by the Constitution. Some other things, courts have routinely struck them down either because they said they didn't have standing, they weren't particularized, they couldn't identify particularized harms. Say that 3 times fast. But I will say this now: Montana may be a bellwether, and that's because actually in Montana's constitution, they say there is a right to a healthy environment. It's the only constitution I know of that has a right to a healthy environment. And so they may have a claim there against the state. They're basically saying the state, by allowing or permitting fossil fuel drilling, is violating their constitutional right to a healthy environment. Now, they'll have to make the case. But Montana is unique in that it does have that provision in its constitution, which may make it problematic there. But they have lost every place they've been so far. And it's interesting, Montana's governor just signed a law that specifically prohibited the state agencies from taking climate change into account when making permitting decisions or or demanding environmental analyses of major projects, infrastructure projects, oil and gas development. So the state itself has said, we're not going to account for climate change while they're being sued. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out there. But Montana is a bit of an outlier.
Yeah, so hopefully, if they win this thing, maybe the courts will send them to the Dutton Ranch to live out, a healthy lifestyle in Montana, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, if the kids are right, then there is no healthy lifestyle in Montana. So maybe they send them to Wyoming or something. I don't know.
Yeah, Montana's about to become unlivable because of climate change. It's too bad.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, see, that's the problem is they may have a right under the Constitution to, I forget what the wording actually is, but it is like a healthy, clean environment, something like that. I forget the actual wording, but they'd have to show, I mean, in the end, it's not enough to say you're threatening my constitutional right. You have to show that it's actually doing it, that the permitting is destroying their futures. And I don't think that's a claim that they can make, especially
well, they can make the claim. Whether they can win it or not, another question.
I meant make out in court. Yeah, I suspect they can't make it out, but especially since I suspect they're all going to be showing up in fossil fuel powered vehicles at the courts when they make their arguments.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the front side of madness this week. Greta can't protest at school anymore because she's graduating at 20, and the Montana climate kids are trying yet again to make climate an issue. But the real craziness this week is centering around El Niño. Yes, indeedy, folks. El Niño is back. The National Weather Service has issued an El Nino alert. It's there. It's happening. It's real. Oh, no. And of course, the Weather Service, when they put out their bulletin, they put it out in a mostly factual basis. But of course, lots of folks are spinning this into all kinds of things. Now, we have a nice graphic that shows the current state of the Pacific Ocean. There it is. You can see the El Nino, that big red streak coming from the west coast of South America, all the way stretching across the Pacific. It's going to get bigger and bigger, and it's going to change the character of weather through much of the world, because the Pacific Ocean and its temperature is the big kahuna of determining weather and climate on Earth, next to the sun anyway. So what's happening now is that we've got the predictable doomsday predictions coming out of the media. The media is talking about record warming. They're talking about new temperature records and extreme weather. So this is going to be the usual hype that we've seen before. I mean, they were saying the same thing about La Niña. La Niña is going to bring destruction. And now El Niño is going to bring destruction. Basically, it's destruction 24/7 throughout the media. They just don't seem to be able to get off of this disaster porn.
That's why I've long claimed it's not science. If it's hotter than normal, it's climate change. If it's colder than normal, it's climate change. If there's more hurricanes, it's climate change. There are fewer hurricanes, it's climate change. You can't pin down. You can't make a prediction, because any result they're going to blame on climate change. And the interesting thing about this El Nino, so they've been warning about this now for 2 months. They've been talking about El Nino. And one of the things that they consistently warned about in these discussions is that it looks like because of where ocean temperatures are, they will push temperatures past the 1.5 degree temperature range that we were supposed to prevent, at all cost from happening under the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, Linnea has said before, they stopped talking about tipping points. I don't think they have stopped talking about tipping points. They certainly haven't stopped talking about 1.5 degrees being a disaster. And yet, if they are right, and I saw today that there's indications that it's already reached now 1.5 degrees just with the onset of El Nino, we have now surpassed what we were supposed to prevent with Paris. 8 years on, it's happened, folks. The world is going to end. We didn't prevent 1.5 degrees. We're headed towards 2, which was way too high because 1.5 degrees was too high. And I say to you, loyal watchers, look out your window. Do you see fire raining from the sky? Do you see 4 horsemen on the apocalypse? Do you see, my point is the world didn't end. We're at 1.5 degrees. They said it would be too late if we reached there, that we had to stop that. And yet now all this time they've been talking about El Nino. Well, okay. 1.5 degrees doesn't care whether it's caused by El Nino or climate change. It's still 1.5 degrees. My suspicion is that now that we've reached it, they'll stop talking about El Nino altogether. Or it'll only be an afterthought. Climate, we've reached the 1.5 degree threshold. I don't know how they're going to play it because we've reached it and the world's not ended. But will they still keep talking about El Nino, or will they downplay El Nino as a factor in it, despite the fact that for 2 months now they've said it's coming and it's likely to push us over 1.5 degrees?
I think the media outlets that have a modicum of integrity left will still talk about El Nino. But the other places, like The Guardian and Grist and so forth, they'll just run with it. It's climate change. Oh, no, we're at the end of the world and blah, 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 blah. And, they're going to talk about record warming, and they'll push El Nino to the side, most likely in most cases, because it gets them where they want to be. We're at the highest point ever in temperature. It's doom right on the horizon. It's going to turbocharge extreme weather, hottest year on record. All of these things are going to be linked more to climate change than they are El Nino. El Nino is just a tool for them to make a point.
I'm puzzled, Anthony. You said something that puzzled me. You said the media outlets that still have a modicum of decency.
Integrity.
Integrity, yeah. Which media outlets are those? I haven't discovered those recently. Sorry, joking.
You have a good point there. I can't think of one right now. Oh, wait. The Harlan Institute. Institute.
ClimateRealism.com. That's
but I guess we're a media outlet. I don't know. But Heartland Daily News. That's a news source. But I liked it because all those headlines that you put up there, Anthony, all the ones you gathered, they all said El Nino in temperature. El Nino in temperature. I want to see in the months ahead how long El Nino is featured in those headlines when they talk about temperatures.
Well, what we can do is we can revisit this topic in a few months, and we can compare headlines in the same outlets and see what they're doing. That'd be a good show all by itself. They're talking about economic destruction coming from El Nino, well, gosh, this has happened before. Severe weather creates destruction. It happens every year all around the globe in hundreds of places. It's not anything new. And yes, sometimes El Nino enhances that. But it's not climate change that's enhancing this. But, we'll see what they say in a few months if they, throw El Nino under the bus and make it all about climate change.
They're saying the exact same thing this time of year last year for La Nina. They were saying that climate change is juicing La Nina. It's making it worse than it's ever been before. It's amplified. We're having all this rain and flash flooding and stuff because of it. They're going to say the same thing for El Nino. They say that what climate change does is it amplifies the effects of previously existing cycles, which obviously there's no way for them to back that up. But
yeah, I want to see how they handle El Nino and La Nina and the Pacific Decadal Oscillation and the Atlantic Decadal Oscillation and the Indian Ocean Bipole and all of those in the climate models, because they don't account for those things in the climate models. They can't model them. And so it's hard for them to say it exacerbates, or what was the term you used, Linnea?
amplifies.
Amplifies. It's hard to say that since they don't even know how these things work and can't model them.
I'd think that if it was hard to say it, that they wouldn't say it, but they say it all the time. So they clearly don't have very much of a problem with saying it.
Yeah. It's hard to honestly represent that claim.
Correct.
That's different than mouthing the words. Yeah, I agree with you.
All righty. So, let's start looking at some facts. We've got a sheet here from Climate at a Glance called Facts About El Nino. El Nino and global warming together. Okay, so this is a picture here of the last really super El Nino that happened. And you can see that red streak going across the Pacific Ocean. That was from 2015. That warmed the globe significantly. And interestingly enough, it's been cooling since then. It's now cooler across the globe than 2015. If climate change was accelerating warming, what's up with that? Anyway, so you can see that big red streak going across the ocean there. But some interesting points further on in the article tell us that, this has been going on for years and years. And if you look at the removal of El Nino from the trend in climate, and Dr. Roy Spencer did this, he took it out, and it doesn't, the El Nino doesn't make any difference in the climate. It really doesn't. It's an event that happens, maybe for a year, and we'll get a spike, and we might get a bit of a bump in the whole global temperature, just a little bit. But then it starts cooling off, just like it has from 2015 to present. And so the cycle that's going to happen with this is this year's El Nino is going to boost us to a new record high, never before seen in the history of mankind. And then they're going to wail and scream about that. And then they're going to go quiet when the temperature starts dropping after that.
Yeah, eight years of no warming, 8 years of cooling or stasis, another hiatus after a 15-year hiatus previously before the last El Nino. And like you say, it's a new record. It's a new record. And, El Nino is dropping it.
Right. Linnea, you've been out in the Gulf where temperatures get pretty warm. Would you say that the ocean there, the Gulf Coast, or not the Gulf Coast, but the Gulf waters, are the main influence in the air temperature that you experienced when you were out on these rigs?
I don't know if I would be able to say anything about that because I didn't get to touch the water temperature, although many days I thought about it. But yeah, no, it was crazy. I honestly did not expect it to be that hot out in the middle of the ocean. I don't know why I didn't expect it. I kind of thought there would be some kind of a cooling effect. No. No, well, it was like, 120 degrees on the metal decks of the boat. So
I was about to say, it didn't help that you were sitting on a metal deck absorbing heat. That could have had something to do with it, right?
Those AC units that they put in our little units were screaming all day. They were just dripping condensation all over our computers and our paperwork all day. It was great.
Well, that's what happens when you're in a high humidity environment and the temperature's up. It's really hard to cool things down because the humidity itself stores so much extra heat in the atmosphere.
You said something, Anthony. You said they'll say it's the worst temperature in all of human history, as if we've been recording temperatures for all of human history.
Right. Well, we don't have thermometers past about 1750. I mean, the very first crude thermometers started showing up about then. We've got some temperatures back then, but just they were hit and miss.
So sporadic placement and probably more primitive devices that weren't as accurate. But in the end, they are going to say exactly what you said, that in all of human history or in the past 15,000 years or whatever, when I first started doing this climate change work longer ago than I care to admit, I was told that it was the warmest century in human history in all time. And then they started hedging their bets because people pointed out, like, well, it's not. We had these little ages called the dinosaurs, and it was warmer there. And they said, oh yeah, okay, it's the warmest the last 20,000 years, and then it was the warmest in the last 10,000 years. And then, every 2 or 3 years, they'd revise it downward till it was the warmest in the last 2,000 years, right? And they'd have the charts that showed 2,000 years. Well, humans were doing pretty good. We came out of an ice age about 12,000 years ago. So what was going on before the 2,000 years? And it was warmer then. What's the cause and what's the complaint now? We didn't die then. So it's just, they have no idea how warm it was, what the actual temperature was beyond very recently. I'm not even talking the 1700s because it was so sporadic then. The proxy data is not a tenth of a degree data or not a degree data. It's very general. And so basically all these claims, they're just making them up.
Well,
they can pick any time period. They can pick any time period because they're just making it up.
A lot of what I've seen on Twitter recently, people have been kind of making fun of the Brits for their heat wave because their, sweltering, killing us heat wave is something in the mid 70s to maybe 80 degrees. And which is funny to us in the United States. And a lot of people have pointed out that the majority of the United States are more in line with like Spain and Morocco than Great Britain. Great Britain is closer to like just Maine or up into Canada. And when you think about it that way, and then you think about all of the panic over warming, and I was just reviewing one of Sterling's climate realism posts about growing grapes for wine in Canada. And I'm thinking, we often mention that they grew grapes for wine of the same varietals that they use in the south of France and in Italy today in Great Britain during the time of the Romans. And so
the Roman warm period.
Yeah. So to then go and say, this is the warmest time in human history, even since just then, 2,500 years ago, just any minor, surface level knowledge of history would show you that that's probably not the case. We might not have had thermometers back then, but we know what kind of climates something like a grape would like. And if the Romans are bringing grapes over to, Great Britain, which is more in line with Maine than it is with, even Washington State, doesn't work. The fact check false doesn't check out.
You know what we call 80 degrees in Texas? A mild spring or fall.
Yep. True. Interestingly enough, I can't remember where I saw it, but this was like maybe a decade ago. I saw an article where someone was claiming that the Roman warm period was caused by the Romans themselves, because they were smelting lead for their piping system. And, they were making concrete, which is CO2 intensive and all this other stuff. And they were trying to blame the Romans for the Roman warm period. It's just mind-boggling the lengths these people will go to.
Well, if so, one more thing to thank the Romans for, right? Because that's when they were the Vikings were setting up permanent.
There you go. There it is.
Han Dynasty. I wonder if they mention in here during the time period that Marco Polo was in China, they actually were using natural gas to light fires and to keep small pilot lights burning for them to use as cooking fuel over there in China in some places, because it was just seeping out of the ground and they would capture it somehow and use it. And they were like, wow, this is amazing. This is like the fires at Delphi. And they didn't quite know how to describe what it was that was happening, but I'm sure that was contributing to warming as well.
Oh, no.
Right, and then the fall of the Roman Empire. The fall of the Roman Empire, it got cold after that, right? So it's perfect correlation, right?
Yeah, cold and deadly, by the way, not cold and better for us, cold and deadlier for us. As far as the Han Dynasty, so they're using natural gas. In the end, what they were doing was they were saving us from climate change, right? Because they were burning methane that was seeping into the atmosphere and converting it to CO2, which is not as powerful a gas.
Yeah.
I wonder what the carbon emissions are burning pitch for warfare.
All right. So the common theme with all of these warming stories that's coming up is going to be tipping point. The 1.5 degrees centigrade tipping point. We've hit the tipping point, and everything's going to go sideways after the tipping point. And that's going to be one of the things they're talking about, because they arbitrarily set in the Paris Agreement this 1.5 degrees centigrade tipping point. Now, we have a Climate at a Glance piece talking about the 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. And if you go a little further down in the article, you'll see that, it's just basically a claim pulled out of nowhere. But climate alarmists and the IPCC say we need to limit to 1.5 degrees centigrade. But it's just not something that you can get your head around, because it's not something that you can. I'm at a loss for words here. Sterling, help me out. It's just being pulled out of thin air, basically. Okay, so down here, if you look at this European graph, right down here, there it is. This is the temperature record of Europe, right? And if you look over there, over on the far left-hand side, comparing it to today, you can see we've already reached, at least in Europe, since then, 1.5 degrees centigrade of warming. It's already happened, and yet Europe is still there. What's up with that?
Well, and also, it conveniently, that little time slice there conveniently starts in the middle of a little ice age, right? If it went back another 700 years, you'd be in the Roman warm period, or a few more years, and you'd be in the medieval warm period. It's interesting when they often pick their time periods very conveniently. I've been dealing with this Arctic ice for a couple of weeks now, and they always show the Arctic ice decline since the nadir. Oh my gosh, it really dipped bad, and they don't show you that the Arctic ice was probably at its peak for the century, the 10 or 15 years before that. In fact,
we didn't have any good records, unfortunately.
Earlier in the century, the evidence from shipping is that it was as low then as it is now.
Yeah, but they don't like to look at history. What's the common problem with the media and climate alarmists today. They do not want to look at history. What they want to look at is model projections. They want to look to the future, and they want to make the future scary so that you'll, do what they say. And that is reduce your carbon footprint, reduce your travel, reduce your meat consumption, reduce your heating and cooling in your home. All these things are going to be necessary to save the planet from the dangerous tipping point. That's going to be the mantra.
Not liking history, they're like high school students, right? What can we learn from history? Oh, history. Oh, let's not. I wish I didn't have to take history. We can't learn nothing from that. How does that apply to real life today? That's how what they act like. That's what they act like.
Yeah, I bet Linnea studied history.
Yeah, well, not in college, but on my own. So good enough. Yeah, no, I love history.
It's one of my best subjects.
Yeah. So we have a climate realism article called Media Regurgitates IPCC's Final Warning on Climate Change Without Realizing We've Already Passed 1.5 degrees centigrade. Yes, the media is just running with it. They don't want to look at the past because, gosh, math is hard and history is hard. We don't want to do that. But looking at this article here, it's the same thing I just said. We've already got there. We already got there looking at the temperature over the past, a couple hundred years. Unfortunately, we don't have temperatures all the way back to the time of Christ. We don't have thermometers back then. But, I'll tell you what, if there were a time machine available to me, I would go put thermometers in the past, doggone it. That's what I would do to make sure that we had some reference for the future. But we can't do that. And so, every time a climate alarmist talks about tipping point, you should also tell them, look at history, look at the Roman warm period, look at the medieval warm period, look at what happened when we came out of the ice ages. All of these dramatic changes in temperature that occurred long before people started driving SUVs, we had coal-fired power plants or natural gas-fired power plants or whatever the blame of the day is. These things all happened well before humans had any emission footprint of any kind.
Well, except for the Romans and their concrete.
Yeah, right. The Romans and their concrete. I will say that Roman concrete is still around. It's very good stuff.
Lead smelting and steel production for swords, I guess. Iron. I don't think they had steel. I think they used iron swords.
Yeah. Oh no. Time is running out. When is this from? 2007. 2007.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was when they were trying to get us to sign, I think, a climate treaty. I think the meetings were in Holland or the Netherlands or something. They said, if we don't sign a treaty now, it'll be too late. And we didn't get it signed. And
is it me or when I was in high school, were they telling us that if we got to 400 parts per million, that it would be the end? I seem to remember that being in my textbook.
That's you, because I never heard the words parts per million when I was in high school. I took chemistry, biology. I didn't take physics, but the words parts per million never graced my my education. So that was just you.
The only thing I remember from that era is the Wendy's commercial. Parts is parts. Remember that?
Yeah. Right. That was the run right after Where's the Beef?
Yeah, exactly. And that where's the beef, that really is kind of what we can say about climate change today. I mean, literally, where's the beef? Where's the mass destruction? Where's the 50 million climate refugees that the UN told us were going to happen in 2005? Where are the mass extinctions? Where are the all of these claims that they've made? Where is it?
Where the 200 million people that Paul Ehrlich told us would starve in sub-Saharan Africa in the 70s? Where is the water that was supposed to already have risen to, I forget which street they predicted in New York City and as a permanent level? Where you're right. Where are all these things? Where is the end of snow? Ask the people in the West whether we got the end of snow.
Yeah. Well, at least in terms of the refugee thing, they can really split hairs on that claim, right? Because they can call anything a climate refugee. We talk about that all the time at Climate Realism. Every time they move people off of a barrier island, like that's 30 feet wide, that they have a couple of nice stilt houses on, they have to drag them off of there because the tide has taken most of the land away. They call it climate refugees. Anytime that there is a weather disaster.
As opposed to climate hostages or kidnapping.
Yeah. Every time that there's any kind of a weather disaster that makes people have to leave their homes, they're calling it climate refugees. So they can define it any way they want. It's totally unfalsifiable, just like their entire theory.
If concern about climate change had been an issue back in the 30s when the TVA was damming all the rivers in Tennessee and people's homes were being flooded, and those people... You can watch the movie TVA, and that old grandmother said, "I was born here. I'm going to die here as the waters rose." They'd say they were climate refugees. The waters are rising due to climate change. Nothing to do with that dam downstream. Don't look behind the curtains.
It's those Atlanteans. They were the OG climate refugees. Or Noah was the OG climate refugee.
Yeah.
There
you go.
Yeah, so there will be some real impacts from El Nino. We are going to have some heat waves. We are going to have some drier conditions in some places, some wetter conditions in other places. But this is normal. This happens with every El Nino. But one of the things that they're talking about this week is going on in Texas, that Texas is being stretched due to heat, and the electric grid is being stretched there. And as a result, doom is just right around the corner. But what they're not telling you, and Sterling can attest to this, is that the reason that Texas has a fragile power grid is because they've embraced the greenism. They've got a lot of wind and solar power. And the problem with that is that it doesn't work really well during heat waves, right, Sterling?
Yeah, well, politicians redesigned our power grid. Engineers designed one that worked, and politicians have quickly undermined their efforts by subsidizing, mandating, giving tax credits to wind and solar energy, which, if anyone's been in West Texas in the summer, where most of these wind farms are, you find the wind doesn't blow in the middle of summer in West Texas. And in parts of the Panhandle, it's hot, dry, and not windy. But we've made ourselves hostage to weather. The grid didn't used to be hostage to weather. It is now. However, I'll say this: I don't think our temperatures. Maybe we're stretching the grid right now. I've seen the warnings, but I haven't seen them on my local TV telling me to conserve yet. When late June and July hit, when August is here, that's when you might, our audience should know that I'm not going to be on for the next 2 weeks. Well, I might not be on in the middle of July and August, but that will be due to power failures on our part, due to Texas politicians. It's madness. We had a good grid. Now we can't even keep it on all the time in the winter properly. That was never an issue in my entire life. Right now I'm more worried about tornadoes than the loss of than causing a loss of power than the power grid failing, because my wife and I sheltered in the bathroom last night when the sirens went off. So,
geez, I'm sorry.
I saw a news article yesterday, and I can't remember where I saw it or what outlet it was in, but it was saying that the weather that's happening in Texas and in parts of the South, right, and like central United States right now is unusual for this time of year. And all I can think is, in what way is season having tornadoes unusual?
Yeah, no, tornado season is not unusual for this time of year. Spring and early summer and midsummer is the peak. June is typically the last of the rain that in Texas for a couple of months. I mean, we may get a smattering in August and July, but not much. And we're getting it. We're actually getting maybe an unusual amount of June rain. I've had rain every day this week in the evenings, which is unusual for us, but that's keeping the temperatures down. So if it's unusual because it's cooler than it normally is this time of year. I've got a pool. I haven't gotten in it yet because it won't stay above 70, much less 80 at night.
Oh, well, that's unfortunate. Are you blaming climate change for that?
I'm blaming the people who are restraining me from emitting CO2 to keep my pool warm, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's not just Texas that has a grid problem. Federal Energy Regulatory Commissioner Mark Christie recently said that the power grid, the national power grid, is facing dire consequences due to coal and gas retirements. As you know, the left has been out trying to shut down virtually every coal plant in the country. And they've had some pretty good success with that. Same thing with natural gas, because they're all emitting that evil CO2, which is going to destroy the planet. But see, here's the thing. After doing all of that, now we have an unstable power grid. And from my viewpoint, the effects of having these policies thrust upon us without being able to vote on them, without any democracy being involved, just pure bureaucracy and alarmism and activism, causing our electric grid to become unstable. The effect from these people and their mindset is far greater than climate change would ever make on the power grid, right?
Well, there's an agency, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, that, as far as I can tell, has no sanction in the Constitution. I've read the Constitution. Find me the word energy there, and the grant to the federal government to regulate the energy supply across the nation. I don't see it in there. But even they recognize the disaster that politicians are foisting upon the grid. So, first off, I'd say the federal government never should have been involved in energy, and certainly not electricity. And of course, for the first 70, 80 years of electricity, they weren't. So many of these agencies, pick your agency, EPA, 1970s. We had 200 years almost of the United States without an EPA, and we didn't all die. Department of Education.
Well, wait, no, people did die, just not from climate and other related issues.
Yeah. Somehow, I don't know what the state of climate justice was then, but I'm sure that's what Johnson was talking about in the 60s when he was talking about justice, was climate justice. So look, FERC has its problems, but the main problem with it and the Department of Energy and the EPA and all these, as far as I believe, is that I've read the Constitution and I don't see the federal government being assigned that power. Those powers were left to the states or the people therein. Now, I know the courts have gone along with it with a wink and a nod, but they're illegitimate and they're bad. Just like every other agency they've created, I can't think of a single one, not one, that was created to solve a problem, that the problem has been solved and hasn't gotten worse in some way or another. Do you think our test scores are up since they created a Department of Education?
No.
Yeah, no, of
That's
course
a whole
not.
other show, Sterling.
No, it is. But I'm talking about any agency. Housing and urban development. Has it solved homelessness? Billions poured into it, and they want more all the time because they've done such a good job up till now.
Yes.
Well, I want to defend FERC a little bit. They tend to be a lot more on our side about the energy stuff than other, federally adjacent groups. I do feel a little bad for them because a lot of their guys are reasonably, they are the engineers, and a lot of them do know what they're trying to do. And they get thrown under the bus when they try to approve something. So they've been really good about approving like LNG export terminals and stuff. They approve this stuff. They send it back to a hostile federal government, the White House, and they send it back to them and they say, no, you have to tweak this in this way. And then the White House turns around, gets on TV, and they say, well, we just can't get anything through FERC. FERC won't approve anything for us. So it's their fault, really. And so these guys are like burying their heads in their desks, trying to get some of this stuff done. So I don't want to be too mean to FERC specifically. They do have some crazies working over there, but a lot of them seem to be pretty good people. And they have been getting more done than they should be able to, considering the administration that we have right now. But man, they know full well that we can't keep adding wind and solar on and expecting it to take up the slack from the coal and natural gas that they're trying to shut down. They know it.
Yeah.
I heard one of their commissioners said recently that they expect serious rolling blackouts more and more often because of this. And they, some of the guys over there are definitely frustrated with this because they know they're the ones that are going to get thrown under the bus for it.
Right.
Well, FERC is one of those agencies where the bureaucrats actually maybe understand their job, but it's the political appointees that screw things up so badly. And now they come and go. So sometimes FERC's doing a good job. But my point is, it shouldn't have a job to do. We shouldn't have regional markets that are regulated by a federal entity that tells them how they must buy and sell power across different states. States used to do it. Their power grids worked. It's only once the federal government got involved with creating regional markets that need to be regulated and having to sell electricity wholesale across state lines and then having to design where the power lines will go that everyone must agree with, that these problems have arisen. And that's all driven by climate change alarm.
Exactly. And there's another problem associated with wind and solar that hasn't really been talked about, and that's something called saturation. The problem is that the electrical grid was designed for significant points of generation, such as a coal plant or a nuclear plant or a hydroelectric dam. And then the points would distribute from that point outward. But now what's happened is we've got these natural gas plants shutting down, the coal plant shutting down, and those points are no longer producing electricity, but we've got these scattered bits and pieces of solar and wind farms and so forth and so on. Well, the grid was not designed to work that way. It was not designed to have this hit and miss power distribution points. And so what's happening now is they're reaching power line saturation in some places. And as a result, they can't get the power to where it's needed the most, and they're having to basically just dump it. They can't do anything with it.
Distributed generation is a real problem. Look, Texas was building wind turbines before we had power lines to ship the power. They were spinning. I hate to call them spinning reserve. They were spinning waste for years because we didn't have the power lines from where the wind blows to where the power was demanded. And so, once again, politicians interfering in markets, trying to, the bureaucrats said, look, if you tell us we got to have wind, we're going to have wind. And they went out there and they said, here's where wind makes sense. Start your bidding. And then they said, oh gosh, how are we going to get the power that you're now generating to Dallas or to Austin or to Houston? Oh, well, we got to have a huge expansion of the power grid. And we're going to voice that on. We didn't tell the taxpayers. We didn't tell the ratepayers they're going to be paying for this. But now we're going to ladle billions. I think it was $9 billion they ladled on ratepayers after the fact because they built the wind turbines. And now they had to distribute it. And of course, you didn't mention this, Anthony, but it's not as if every megawatt, kilowatt of electricity that is generated at point A arrives at point B, C, or D, because the longer it travels along a power line through transformers and things, the more power is lost along the way. So you have to overbuild wind and solar to get the power that you anticipate, not just because they're intermittent, but because they're so far from where the power is needed.
Right. Yeah, the whole thing's a train wreck. And to sum it up, wind power blows. It's just that simple. Anyway, so we got some questions. We've got questions. We've got answers, hopefully. Let's see some of the questions that have come in so far. We've got, has anyone noticed that every summer forecast in the U.S. is warmer than average? There's no cold anywhere. Well, that's basically the narrative. And no one in the powers that be want to talk about a cold summer because, gosh, that would just ruin the whole climate change thing, right?
Well, and this year it may well be a little warmer because of Niño and everything. So I wouldn't be surprised by that this summer, maybe further to the east. But, oh, well, actually, you know what? It's already been a super cold start of summer at Mount Washington. So, yeah, that's been a bad time.
Tell that to Mount Washington or some other places that have been getting unusually cold weather with snow. Right. Mount Washington set a record. It is now June 16th, but by June 12th, they had already set the monthly record for snow at Mount Washington, New Hampshire.
And they're forecasted for more in the coming week.
That's correct.
Yep. And now the vineyards that are in the Northeast are asking the federal government for relief because of disaster due to the cold and frost that they didn't anticipate happening, because it's going to be warm. Climate change tells us it's going to be warm. It's going to be hot and all that stuff.
Vineyards and orchards both. The fruit trees are also.
Right. I'm not sure what that question means.
Have his cycles into.
Okay, it's part two of this question, I guess. How many El Nino cycles have we seen in the last 50 years? Well, it's about 50-50. We are either in one or the other. I did a climate realism piece a few months ago where we looked at the number of cycles, and there have been, about 26 La Nina cycles and 25 El Nino cycles, I remember. Then not all of them are strong. Some of them are really strong. Some of them are just mild. But, they go back and forth all the time. It's normal. And it's back and forth, back and forth. And depending on where it's at, depends on how the jet stream gets redirected, how much moisture gets injected into the atmosphere from the Pacific, and so forth and so on. And so it's not anything new. And it's a normal process that goes on in the atmosphere.
It surprises me that it's that there are that many in 50 years, because sometimes these things hang on for more than 1 year.
Yeah, well,
I mean, the last La Nina cycle that we're just coming out of lasted 3 years?
I know, and maybe my number about the number of years is wrong. It might be 75. I think it goes it goes back to about 1950 or whatever when they first started looking at it.
Yes, that's 73 years. Yeah,
but yeah, it's about evenly balanced in modern history since 1950 is how I recall it. Next question. I'm a Greta Thunberg mascot toy.
Is it a chew toy?
We got to get one of those.
Is it a chew toy for pets? My dog would love a Greta chew toy.
Yeah, that's cool. Let's get one. Yeah, Sterling, I invite you to purchase one of those. And for the next, when you're back, let's get your dog on camera and see how he likes the Greta chew toy.
Oh, I guarantee I'll shake that in its face and she'll like it.
If it's a stuffed animal, they always like it.
It may not last. It may not last long, but she'll have fun with it while it does.
Yeah. So there was that question there. Anthony, was there this much global warming hype during the 97-98 El Nino? No, not as much, because climate change wasn't the universal boogeyman back then. But I will point out that about that same time, Michael Mann came out with this infamous hockey stick. And that's when the interest really started picking up, because we had some really hot summer days in 97, 98. We had some events associated with an El Nino in terms of storms and so forth. And then when the hockey stick came out, the people that, the low information science type people that yell, follow the science, go, aha, there it is. There's the proof. And they started rushing towards that. And the hockey stick was the catalyst for making hype happen. All right. Any prediction on the duration? I haven't seen any yet, but in typical fashion, they last 1 or 2 years. That's typical. Glaciers melting in Glacier National Park. Well, yes, the glaciers melt every summer a bit.
Yeah.
Glaciers
had to take down that sign.
Yeah, Glacier. Yeah, they did. They had to rescind the sign because they were idiots by putting it up. They were wrong. But glaciers have been melting in Glacier National Park since it was declared a national park, and before. There's a lot of evidence that the glaciers were much more extensive before Europeans got there.
In fact, I think that a lot of the, not on that side of the country, on the other side of the country, I think I've read somewhere that a lot of the like boulders and stuff that are deposited in Central Park are glacial deposits. So the glaciers were melting in New York too, I guess. You could be concerned about that.
Right. So we had a question about tornadoes. Why are there no tornadoes in the Southern Hemisphere? Well, that's not exactly true. Tornadoes do, in fact, occur in the Southern Hemisphere, but they're much less than what we have in the Northern Hemisphere, mainly because of the way that weather fronts happen and topography, geography, and so forth. The United States has about 75% of the tornadoes in the world. And a lot of it has to do with the unique geography associated with the Gulf Coast and the Midwest and Canada. We get these cold fronts that roar in from Canada, that meet warm air masses coming in from the Gulf Coast. We get the collision zone in the Midwest. We get wind shear that creates the spinning motion. Just like, when you take your canoe paddle and you put it in the water and you make little whirlpools. Well, that happens when we get warm and cold air sliding across each other on fronts. It creates vorticity. And so in the United States, because of its geography, we end up with the most tornadoes, but they do occur in the southern hemisphere. Next question.
Someone quick, rapid attribution.
Yeah, I suppose that in fact it'll contribute to the sea level rise slowing, right? I mean, if their theory is right, it should slow because it's blocking the sun, and so the water's not heating, so we don't have thermal expansion.
I've never heard of this one. Volcanism from Camus, plate climatology. What the hell is plate climatology? I have no idea what plate climatology is.
And I'm not familiar with Camus.
No. Anyway, I think you mean plate geology.
Plate
out?
Tectonics or something.
Okay. Do we have any more questions, or are we done for the day? I saw this big word out there, so who knows what that means? You know,
someone asked when we're going to look into the Thacker Pass lithium mine. That might be something worth looking into.
If we're putting in a lithium mine, then that sounds probably like a good thing.
Yeah,
take some of that away from China.
Well, I suspect that it won't be long before the EPA asks them to withdraw the permit. I mean, that's what they did in Minnesota. That's what they did in Minnesota. They're about to break ground on a nickel mine in Minnesota. Yeah. They've got all the permits, and the EPA goes to the Army Corps of Engineers and said, "Could you withdraw that permit, please?" And they said, "Okay."
Yeah. So I want to point out that because of the wildfires and so forth, Joe Biden has a solution to keep sea level rise from happening. He has announced that by 2025, all wildfires must be electric powered, right? That'll solve it. That'll fix it. Ugh.
Well, so many of them are now, right? In California, when the wires fall to the ground or get knocked down by trees and start fires.
Anyway, that wraps it up for number 67, Climate Change Roundtable. Be sure to visit our website, climaterealism.com, climateataglance.com, where you can get facts on demand, and our new energyattaglance.com, run by Linnea, who's got some interesting topics there about, what's real and what isn't about energy. I want to thank you both for being with us today. I want to thank our readers and viewers for their submitted questions. And I want to thank you for joining us every week. We'll be back next week with another edition. Sterling won't be here. He's going to take a much needed vacation for a couple of weeks. Yeah, he'll be back in a couple of weeks. We'll have some guests coming up in the next couple of weeks and some new topics for you. So for the Heartland Institute, Linnea and Sterling, I'm Anthony Watts, Senior Fellow for the Heartland Institute, wishing you a good day and a great weekend.